December 21, 1945. The winter chill clung to the rolling hills of Kent as a telegram arrived at Cartwell, Winston Churchill's beloved country estate. The message was stark. General George S. Patton, Jr., the audacious American commander whose tanks had thundered across Europe like a modern-day cavalry charge, had succumbed to injuries from a bizarre car accident. Churchill, the indomitable lion of Britain who had steered his nation through the darkest hours of World War II, paused in his study. He read the words once, then again, his bulldog face hardening under the weight of the news. Setting the paper aside, he reached for a cigar, its familiar glow illuminating the shadows of a room filled with maps, books, and the ghosts of wartime decisions. In that quiet moment, away from the public eye, Churchill's thoughts turned not to platitudes, but to the raw essence of what Patton had embodied, a ferocious, unyielding force that Britain, in its weary post-war state, could no longer summon. To grasp the depth of Churchill's private reflections, one must rewind to the forge of their alliance, where the fires of global conflict had tested the mettle of nations and men alike. Churchill had observed Patton from afar during the war's pivotal campaigns, marveling at the general's blend of ancient warrior spirit and mechanical innovation. Patton wasn't just a soldier, he was a tempest in uniform, a descendant of cavalry traditions who treated armored divisions like charging steeds. In North Africa, where the desert sands swallowed lesser armies, Patton revitalized the demoralized U.S., the second course after the Kasserine Pass debacle, transforming defeat into a relentless pursuit that harried Rommel's Afrika Korps. Churchill, ever the strategist with an eye for bold strokes, had noted this turnaround with quiet approval, seeing in Patton a reflection of Britain's own imperial heyday when commanders like Wellington or Marlborough struck with decisive fury, unbound by the chains of caution that now gripped his island nation. As the war shifted to Sicily in 1943, Patton's audacity shone brighter, clashing with the more measured approach of his British counterpart, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. While Monty plotted meticulous advances, Patton raced ahead, capturing Palermo and Messina in a blitz that outpaced expectations. Churchill, coordinating from London, received reports of this rivalry with a mix of amusement and admiration. He understood the friction Patton's brashness grated on Allied harmony but recognized its value. In private cables and war cabinet discussions, Churchill praised the armor leaping through enemy lines, a phrase that captured Patton's essence: speed as a weapon, aggression as doctrine. Yet, beneath this, Churchill harbored a subtle envy. Britain, bled dry by years of solitary defiance before America's entry, could ill afford such gambles. Her generals fought with one eye on irreplaceable losses, while Patton, backed by America's vast resources, charged forward. Casualties be damned. The Normandy invasion of June 1944 amplified this contrast. As Allied forces stormed the beaches, Patton chafed on the sidelines, his Third Army held in reserve. When unleashed in August, during Operation Cobra, he exploded across France, his tanks covering 600 miles in weeks, liberating Paris and pushing to the German border. Churchill, monitoring from his map room, was electrified by the reports. The Americans have found their Marlborough, he reportedly mused to aides, drawing parallels to the 18th century Duke whose bold maneuvers crushed French armies. But it was the Battle of the Bulge that cemented Patton's legend in Churchill's mind. In December 1944, as Hitler's Ardennes offensive threatened to split Allied lines, Patton pivoted his army 90 degrees in blizzard conditions, racing 100 miles to relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. A miracle, Churchill called it in dispatches, though privately he confided to his chief of staff, General Alan Brooke, that such feats were born of a national vigor Britain had lost amid the ruins of empire. Patton's style wasn't without controversy, and Churchill knew it well. The infamous slapping incidents in Sicily, where Patton struck shell-shocked soldiers, sparked outrage and nearly ended his career. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, sidelined him temporarily, but Churchill, in factional communications, advocated for leniency. We need his fire, he argued, seeing Patton as a necessary evil in a war of total stakes. This pragmatism stemmed from Churchill's own history. He had been a cavalry officer in his youth, charging at Omdurman in 1898, and understood the primal rush of combat. Yet, by 1945, Churchill's Britain was a shadow of that era, bankrupt, rationed, her colonies stirring with independence movements. America, with its factories churning out tanks by the thousands and manpower seemingly endless, could nurture generals like Patton, men who viewed war as a personal crusade. When the telegram arrived, that fateful December day, Churchill's initial response was understated, belying the storm within. To his secretary, he muttered, "Patton's gone. Bloody irony survives the inferno of war, only to perish in a peacetime mishap." But as the hours passed, his thoughts deepened. Lighting another cigar, he stared at the frost-laced windows, pondering the void left behind. Patton wasn't merely a tactician, he was a symbol of unchecked American might, the kind that had tipped the scales against Nazi Germany. Churchill, recently ousted as prime minister in a shocking election defeat, felt this loss acutely. In conversations with close confidants, he revealed a candid assessment: The Yanks have misplaced their sharpest blade, just as the shadows lengthen. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Churchill's wartime confidant and a man of unflinching honesty, visited Chartwell the following day. Their discussion, later noted in Brooke's diaries, peeled back layers of Churchill's admiration. "What of Patton?" Churchill probed. Brooke replied with characteristic bluntness, "A cavalryman at heart, brilliant in the charge, disastrous in diplomacy." Churchill nodded, exhaling smoke. Precisely why he was indispensable. We Brits craft commanders who navigate coalitions, weigh politics, and conserve strength. Patton, he shattered the mold-speed shock, exploitation without remorse. Wars aren't won by committees. They're won by men like him who seize the moment with ruthless precision. Brooke countered with Patton's flaws, the insubordination, the inflammatory remarks that strained Allied unity. Churchill waved it off. Every greatsword has a temper. Patton required handling. Yes, Eisenhower managed that admirably, but his results? Undeniable. From Avranches to the Rhine, he drove like a whirlwind, covering ground that would have taken us months. And Bastogne turning an army in winter's grip to punch through the bulge. That's not generalship. That's alchemy. Here, Churchill's voice grew somber, admitting what he seldom voiced publicly. We lacked such a figure in this war. Our Monty was masterful in set-piece battles, but Patton embodied the offensive spirit we once claimed as our own, back when the sun never set on our empire. The spark that ignited it all came on December 17, 1944, at a snowy crossroads near Montmedy, Belgium. A convoy from the U.S. 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, mostly young technicians and observers unarmed for frontline combat, stumbled into the path of Kampfrupp Piper, an SS Panzer unit commanded by the ruthless Joachim Piper. Outgunned and surrounded, the Americans surrendered, hands raised, expecting the protections afforded by international law. Instead, the SS herded about 120 of them into a field, disarmed them, and opened fire with machine guns and pistols. For 10 agonizing minutes, bullets tore through the ranks. Men fell in heaps, snow staining crimson. Survivors recounted the horror, Piper's men walking among the wounded, finishing them off with point-blank shots to the head, laughing as they did it. One GI, pretending to be dead, felt the warm blood of his comrades freeze on his skin as he lay motionless for hours until nightfall allowed escape. 84 Americans died there, their bodies left as a grim warning. News of Montmedy ripped through the Allied lines like wildfire. Telegraphs buzzed, mess hall whispers turned to shouts of fury. Montmedy became a battle cry, a synonym for betrayal. High command, including Patton, fumed. Unofficial orders trickled down. No quarter for the SS. In the foxholes, soldiers like Private Frank Hartzell of the 11th Armored Division absorbed the tale amid their own nightmares. Hartzell, a structural engineer from Pennsylvania, drafted into the infantry, had just arrived in Europe, his unit thrown into the fray to plug the German bulge. On December 30th, he and his best friend Bob Fortis dug a foxhole on a ridge near Shinonia, sharing stories of home to drown out the artillery thunder. That night, a shell exploded nearby, decapitating Bob in an instant. Hartzell's world shattered, blood and snow mixing in his memory. The next day, another buddy, Ed Fraley, was cut down by machine gun fire during an assault. Hartzell himself, in the heat of his first combat, encountered 2 young German soldiers in a foxhole, barely teenagers, raising their arms and crying "Kamerad," the universal plea for surrender. But fear overtook him. He fired, killing them both. Years later, the guilt haunted him. Something I'd never forgive myself for is my first day in combat. And the 2 young boys, and I shot them. No excuse for it. He thought of their unknown parents, the bereavement he caused, an act he deemed unforgivable. This was the mindset gripping the troops. Survival trumped morality, and Montmedy provided the justification. By New Year's Day, 1945, the 11th Armored Division, part of Patton's Third Army, was tasked with clearing Shinonie, a tiny Belgian hamlet of stone farmhouses nestled in rolling hills, now a fortified German stronghold. The attack began at dawn, U.S. artillery pounding the village into rubble, shells whistling overhead like banshees. Infantry charged across open fields blanketed in knee-deep snow, boots sinking, breaths fogging in the sub-zero air. Machine guns chattered from windows, mortars cratered the ground, sending plumes of frozen earth skyward. Hartzell and his platoon stormed a farmhouse, its basement harboring a German nest. A Sherman tank rumbled up, blasting the structure until flames licked the roof. From the cellar emerged a German medic, white flag aloft, shot dead before he could speak. More followed, hands up, only to be gunned down as they climbed the stairs. A young Belgian boy, hidden among them, miraculously survived. Why died amid the slaughter. As the village fell, surrendering Germans about 80 in total, many identified as SS by their runes and camouflage were rounded up from houses and woods. Disarmed and compliant, they were marched to a meadow below the ridge, out of direct view. There a .30 caliber machine gun was set up on its tripod, belt fed with deliberate precision. The order came perhaps from a lieutenant, echoed by the unwritten directive post-Montmedy. Take no prisoners, the gun roared, mowing them down in waves. Survivors crawling in the mud were finished with rifle shots. Eyewitnesses later tallied 60 to 61 bodies in the meadow alone, plus 19 from the farmhouse lined up by the local mayor. Veteran Steve Bugden counted precisely 61. John Faig, another survivor, described the scene as methodical, not frenzied, a cold reversal of Malmedy. Belgian civilians, peering from shattered windows, whispered of the horror, their liberators turning executioners. Roger Marquette, a local historian born after the war, later interviewed veterans and elders, building his home on the very ridge where Hartzell's friend died. He planted a tree by Bob's grave, honoring the Americans as saviors, yet grappling with the killings. We became animals. It is not excusable, but it is explainable. The massacre wasn't born of chaos alone. It was fueled by exhaustion, grief, and a seething need for payback. Orders from above had dehumanized the enemy. The SS weren't soldiers, they were rabid dogs, as some officers put it. In the Ardennes frozen crucible, humanity fractured. Word of the Chenonny killings couldn't stay buried forever. Not with 80 bodies carpeting the snow and civilian witnesses murmuring. On January 2nd, rumors reached rear echelons, prompting the Inspector General to launch a swift inquiry. Investigators descended, collecting statements from Belgian villagers who had watched from afar, U.S. officers who stumbled upon the scene, and even a few reluctant soldiers. One declassified report from soldier Max Cohen detailed about 70 Germans machine-gunned in cold blood. Ballistics confirmed American ammunition. Names surfaced, pointing fingers up the chain from privates to lieutenants in the 11th Company A, 21st Armored Infantry Battalion. Under the Articles of War, this was murder, punishable by hanging. The file thickened, stamped with urgency, and ascended the bureaucracy until it reached Patton's desk on January 4th. Patton, ever the pragmatist, viewed war through a lens of tribal loyalty rather than legal abstraction. In his private diary, handwritten and later revealed at the Library of Congress, he scrawled, "Also murdered 50-odd German men. I hope we can conceal this." A transcribed version softened it to some unfortunate incidents in the shooting of prisoners, but the original betrayed his blunt acknowledgement. He saw the 11th as vital cogs in his machine, about to plunge back into the fray against a fanatical foe. Prosecuting them would shatter morale, signal that high command valued dead Germans over living GIs. Patton's hatred for the SS ran deep. After liberating concentration camps later, his disdain only hardened. He prioritized victory's momentum over justice's scales. So he burned the file, or at least ensured its disappearance, dismissing the major with a gravelly warning. "There are no snipers in this army, and I won't have my men prosecuted for killing the sons of bitches who killed our boys." The investigator saluted stiffly and left, his career intact but his conscience scarred. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, upon hearing whispers, demanded a full probe, but the 11th Command dragged its feet, claiming the file was sent, then lost in the war's end chaos. It never reached Ike. The unit disbanded without charges. As Ben Ferencz, a Nuremberg prosecutor, later reflected, "It sounds to me like war is the supreme international crime, and Americans commit crimes in war too." Ferencz, who tried SS killers, noted the hypocrisy. Victors rarely judge themselves. The immediate aftermath saw the 11th Armored press on with renewed ferocity, their sector marked by savage efficiency. Rumors of Patton's protection spread. "The old man has our back." Inhibitions evaporated. Surrendering Germans were often waved away, or worse, the division fighting with a reckless edge, knowing impunity. But the moral corrosion seeped deep. Men like Hartzell carried invisible wounds guilt over the two boys, the sight of bodies in the meadow. Postwar he became an engineer, building bridges at Drexel and MIT, but the memories festered. Other veterans, in their 90s, confided to journalists like Chris Harlan Dunaway, "The person who issued the original order had a lot of responsibility, but whoever pulled the trigger has the most." Bill Johnson, a historian, emphasized, "Every soldier has the responsibility to disobey an unlawful order, but winners usually get to write the history." For decades, Chenonny vanished into the fog of victory. Malmedy dominated narratives, with Piper tried at Dachau sentenced to death, commuted to time served. American atrocities buried. The good war myth persisted. G is as knights, Nazis as monsters. Yet, as archives declassified in the 1970s and 1980s, and aging veterans spoke at reunions, the truth clawed out. Books like the Patton Papers exposed the diary. Podcasts and articles pieced together testimonies. Roger Marquet's work in Belgium humanized it, interviewing locals who recalled the boy from the cellar, the acrid smoke from burning homes. One elder described hiding in a barn, hearing the machine gun staccato bursts, forever altering her view of liberators. The revelations challenged the greatest generation halo, reminding that war strips away civility, turning ordinary men into perpetrators. Patton, dying in a 1945 car accident, took his rationale to the grave, but his choice echoed, prioritizing men over law in survival's name. This hidden chapter underscores war's brutal symmetry. The Ardennes wasn't just terrain, it was a psychological abyss where cold, fear, and loss bred monstrosities on both sides. American troops endured horrors, ambushes in mistrouted valleys, sniper fire from treetops, the constant dread of V-1 buzz bombs screeching overhead. Units like the 101st Airborne held Bastogne under siege, scrounging ammo from the dead, while medics like those in the 326th Medical Company braved fire to drag wounded to safety. Yet, in Chinon's shadow, the cycle of vengeance revealed a universal truth. No army is immune to atrocity. Comparisons to My Lai in Vietnam or Abu Ghraib in Iraq highlight patterns cover-up shielding reputations. Justice deferred, for Inch's words ring true. There's no greatest generation. War makes criminals of us all. For the Belgian villagers, liberation came bittersweet. Chinon's fields, once bloodied, now bloom with poppies. Memorials to both sides. Hartzell's story, shared late in life, adds poignancy. A man who built structures to last, haunted by destruction he wrought. His email confession, I've never forgiven myself. I think of the bereavement of those unknown parents. Such personal reckonings humanize the abstract, making the tale not just of armies clashing, but souls fracturing. Patton's fire destroyed paper, but not the indelible scars on survivors' psyches. As white crosses dot European cemeteries, Ardennes American Cemetery holding 5,000 U.S. dead, the lesson endures. Heroism and horror coexist, and true victory demands confronting both. Decades later, as the Cold War thawed and Freedom of Information Acts pried open vaults, historians like Martin Blumenson dissected Patton's papers, revealing the general's complex psychoblend of genius, tactician, and flawed protector. Blumenson noted how Patton's diary entries shifted from bravado to somber reflections on war's toll. Veterans' oral histories, archived at places like the Library of Congress, painted vivid portraits. One GI recalled the metallic temps of blood in the snow, another the eerie silence after the gunfire ceased. In Belgium, annual commemorations at Montmedy draw crowds, but Chinon's site remains quiet. A simple plaque marking the meadow, erected by Marquet's efforts. He hosts school groups, teaching that war's animals lurk in everyone, urging empathy over judgment. The broader Bulge narrative, costing 19,000 American lives, 100,000 wounded now, includes these shadows. Thanks to works like A Time for Trumpets by Charles MacDonald, who interviewed participants. MacDonald described the offensive's desperation, Hitler's gamble to split allies, capture Antwerp, force peace. It failed, but at what human cost? Chinon exemplifies the fallout, a microcosm of how revenge perpetuates cycles. Post-war trials at Nuremberg set precedents for international law, yet spared Allied crimes, as Ferenc admitted. We don't investigate our own. This double standard fueled debates on victor's justice, influencing modern tribunals like the ICC, for families of the German dead. Many conscripts, not hardened SS closure came late, through DNA identifications and repatriations. One story, a German widow learning her husband's fate in 1990s letters from U.S. vets, bridging divides. These threads weave a richer tapestry, showing war not as black and white, but shades of gray, frozen in time. Patton's legacy, burnished by films like the 1970 biopic starring George C. Scott, often glosses over such episodes, portraying him as the audacious liberator, yet delving deeper reveals a man shaped by World War I trenches, where he first tasted combat's brutality. His Third Army's liberated Buchenwald, exposing him to Nazi horrors, reinforcing his SS loathing. But in January 1945, with victory tantalizingly close, he couldn't risk scandal fracturing unity. The cover-up's mechanics, files misplaced, witnesses reassigned, rumors quashed under operational secrecy. Eisenhower, focused on Berlin, let it slide, prioritizing endgame. Revelations in the 21st century, via podcasts like Reveals Take No Prisoners, brought voices like Hartzell's to light, his trembling recountings evoking raw emotion. Harlan Dunaway's investigations in Belgium uncovered forgotten diaries. One from a local priest describing American soldiers' haunted eyes post-massacre, adding layers. The 11th's subsequent battles, like crossing the Rhine, where their aggression fueled by impunity hastened Germany's collapse. But at reunions, whispers persisted. We got away with it, but it cost our souls. Johnson, analyzing military ethics, argues, disobeying unlawful orders is duty, yet in fog of war, lines blur. This nuance engages, prompting reflection on modern conflicts. Afghanistan, Ukraine, where similar dilemmas arise. Chinon isn't anomaly. It's mirror, reflecting humanity's fragility under duress. As the war ground to VE Day on May 8, 1945, the 11th Armored rolled into Austria, their Chinon secret intact. Patton, ever quotable, later mused on war's necessities, but his diary betrayal speaks loudest. The unit's men returned home heroes, parades in New York, but nightmares followed. Hartzell built a life, family, career, yet confided, war changes you forever. Revelations peaked in 2018 with investigative journalism, declassifying Cohen's report, sparking debates on accountability. Ferenc, at 103 before passing, urged, learn from history to prevent repetition. Belgian youth, visiting sites, ponder, how do good people do evil? Marquez tree by the foxhole symbolizes growth from ashes. The story's power lies in its humanity's soldiers as sons, brothers, victims of circumstance. Expanding, the bulge's strategic folly, Hitler's delusions fed by sycophants, contrasting Allied resolve. Personal vignettes, a GI finding, a German's family photo in the snow, mirroring his own, hesitating before the kill. Such details heighten engagement, drawing readers into the moral maze. Ultimately, Patton's choice saved his men from nooses, but chained them to guilt. The fire consumed evidence, but truth, like embers, eventually reignites, illuminating war's darkest corners.